Alright. The year has come and gone. The Formula 1 season is done, and it was an okay year, I guess. Sure, we didn't quite get the battle for the Drivers' Championship like we all wanted, but any season without Sochi on the calendar is a win in my book. And for the first time this century, literally, McLaren won the Constructors' Championship. To give you an idea of how long it's been, 7 of next year's F1 drivers weren't even born when they last won it. Which is very interesting, but monologues are boring. We're only here for one purpose, really. And so it's time to grade the Formula 1 drivers of 2024.
Finally.
But first,
I've got a bone to pick here. At the FIA prize-giving gala, Sergio Perez was awarded the Action of the Year for his switchback double overtake in Shanghai on the Spanish contention of Sainz and Eyebrows. But frankly, while it was a big brain move from Checo, it's not quite in the same league as another action that took place a couple months prior. The last race of the Formula Regional Oceania Championship took place at the picturesque Highlands Motorsport Park. The points leader, Roman Belinsky, had already sewn up the championship, but there was still some incentive for that last race, for it was the first Grand Prix of the year, the New Zealand Grand Prix. I know, it don't quite carry the weight of an F1 one, but we just don't have that kind of moolah over here. As for the race itself, it was... I don't know. It was okay, I guess. About as much as you can expect out of these wrist-breaking aero wash machines that the FIA have bestowed upon us. Belinsky had an okay race, but he did find himself trapped behind teammate Bryce Aaron. These cars around this track, it's almost impossible to overtake here. Eventually, Belinsky did manage to get past him on the last corner of the last lap, but it meant resorting to some rather extreme gymnastics. Now, forgive me for saying this, but this really was an overtake.
You suck!
And hey, the championship organizers obviously thought so too, because they literally awarded this the official overtake of the season. Checo's move in Shanghai, Action of the Year. Only one of these dudes actually overtook. But I know there are plenty of people who vehemently disagree with either of those. And y'all had a lot of good suggestions for great overtakes this year, but this was all just a bit of fun. Time to get semi-serious now. Well, sort of, because it's time to grade some Donnies. Let's start from 0 points. The last halfway decent driver that the United States of Cheese had bestowed upon the world of Formula 1 was arguably Eddie Cheever back in the 1980s, and the last winner was Mario Andretti back in 1978. It was hoped that when he came in, that Logan Sargent would break the trend set down by the likes of Scott Speed and not drown in catastrophic levels of mid, and instead carry on the legacy of the likes of Andretti and Cheever. But unfortunately, we've got to wait for yet another little while, as dear old Logan here just continued the trend, probably owing to the fact that unlike Andretti and Cheever, Sargent wasn't... Do I really need to spell it out for you here? Okay then, fine. He wasn't Italian. His overall results were not insultingly bad, but for a dude who should have settled in by now, this appeared to be his ceiling. The amount of mistakes being made were butchering the team, and the one that he made at Zandvoort was so unforgivably bad that it prompted Williams to fire him then and there. Getting fired mid-season due to underperformance and wanton destruction means that I gotta dip into the cavern of letters and pull out this bad boy. But there was some silver lining to all of this, and this silver lining did have some Italian heritage. When they handed Logan's car over to Franco Colapinto for FP1 at Silverstone, I was happier than a rat in an Altoona Macca's. This kid, who had shown so much potential, but little to no money for racing at this type of level, was being given a chance to drive in a Grand Prix weekend. And then a couple rounds later, when they told Logan to vamoose, and they gave Franco the drive full time for the rest of the year, it sent a nation into hysterics. The first properly good F1 driver from that nation since Carlos Reutemann, and he repaid all of this gesture by immediately proving his worth, proving that he had what it took to drive in the top flight of motorsport, set scorching times, bettering more experienced teammates, and not making any mistakes in the The wrecks that he had definitely put a damper on things, and it will affect his rating, but one thing that you cannot deny was just how much potential he had shown. Actually, screw potential, he was just really damn fast. So much so that half the teams ended up headhunting him toward the tail end of the year. He's out of a drive for 2025 as of this recording, but he absolutely has to return. Cut the bridge, cut the crap, just make sure he's back to where he belongs. Because to go from the completely one-sided teammate battle to the 50-50 one that caused the drivers to up their games is indicative of that promise. Or perhaps it just exposed Sargent that little bit more. And if that's the case, where the hell exactly is Alex Albon in all of this? Albon's stocks had never been higher than his time with Williams. The car was never the best, but that's why him getting into the points was always such a big deal. And not just the fact that he got there, but how he got there. The racecraft, the speed, it just seemed the driving of someone on the road to redemption. This year, the FW46 was found wanting for grip and would overheat within 20 miles of a beach. They were also seriously skinny on spare parts, which was all kind of self-inflicted, so whenever priority was required, it was always afforded to Alex on the basis that he was always their best shot. He had beaten the everlasting crap out of Sargent for the past 2 years, so who could blame them? However, when Franco entered the team, the pendulum began to swing, and suddenly his performances began to dilute just a tad in the face of this. It doesn't take away his good performances, and there were plenty this year, but we have to wonder where he truly is at, because even for believers in Colapinto, such as myself, you can't help but wonder what would happen next year when the smooth operator enters that camp and takes him on. And let's not forget that all the while, Sauber are starting to get their house back in order, and were breathing right down their necks at the end of the season, and they're just lucky that it took them so damn long to score any points. For the large part this year, Zhou Guanyu's overall pace was bad. Really bad. The Sauber wasn't anything special. I wasn't expecting him to win for God's sake, but it wasn't rare for the gap in qualifying between he and his teammates to balloon to over half a second, and sometimes it was even larger than that. He did eventually turn things around with a great run in the latter half of the year, nabbing Sauber's only points of the season in Qatar with a driver of the day performance, but otherwise, by and large, he was kind of nowhere on that grid, and that's a large reason why he's been given the boot for 2025 despite an extreme amount of money behind him, because a couple of good performances aren't going to outweigh the 20 other bad ones. Some may point out, oh, but he got points and his teammate didn't? You can't seriously tell me with a straight face that Zhou Guanyu was better as a whole throughout the year 2024 than Valtteri Bottas was. Finishing 22nd in a 20-car championship is a meme, and a bitter pill to swallow, especially given that he in no way deserved that. For reference, merely watch his performance in the last qualifying session of the year, where he put his Sauber into the top 10. There was a slew of extremely good performances from him that year, but for the large part, that Sauber didn't have a hope in hell of scoring any points. People are weird about stats in a game where half the battle is out of the hands of the driver, but no one can deny that Valtteri did not deserve to go out like this. Is this the end for him? Well, if it is, it kinda sucks. But in preparing for the future, they're going to bring on board the second coming of Enrico Bernaldi, and another dude who, for the past couple of years, has been one of the more solid drivers throughout the entire F1 grid. At the start of this year, I berated the Haas F1 team, saying that they weren't America's team and that they were a joke, that Gene Haas had no spine, and that they were metal in the midst of midness. Here we are 10 months later, and I will gladly go fuck myself, because on every metric, they have proven me wrong. In fact, they've proven a lot of people wrong. They really should have finished 6th in the Constructors' Championship this year had Looney Tunes not ensued in Brazil, and Nico Hülkenberg was a big part of their new lease of life. For the first half of the year, Hulk was strong and consistent on such a level that people were rating him in amongst the top drivers on the grid overall. The form fell off slightly in the second half of the year, but from Singapore onwards, he was consistently in the points. He was one measly point away from breaking into the top 10 in the driver's standings, and he clearly did have the edge over his teammate who, after returning to Formula 1 a couple of years ago, went from hero to zero, then back to hero before settling somewhere in between. For the first half of the year, Kevin Magnussen largely lay in the shadow of Hulk, not performing badly per se, but when comparing the two, it was a one-way, lopsided battle. After the season break, however, the tide began to turn, and he started to rep himself in a better light. This rebound, however, hit a snag. With an array of clumsy incidents, he became the first driver since Romain Grosjean in 2012 to receive a race ban. And frankly, he was kinda lucky that he didn't receive one earlier, with how low his give-a-shit reserves were. It appears this may be the last we see of K-Mag in a Formula 1 car, and really, the season kinda summed up how he's been throughout the majority of his Grand Prix career. Fast as all hell, faster in reality than most people today have ever seen him, but betrayed by instances of his own recklessness. And the bitch of it all really is that things could have turned out so much different if certain people just took a chance on him. As it stands, Haas are set to take a chance on another young driver who we already kind of know by now. After getting pole position in the pathetic dumpster fire mess of a racing series known as Formula 2, Ollie the Bear Bearman was summoned to the Ferrari garage on Saturday morning with a simple request. Our driver has crabs. we need you to drive. To make your Formula 1 debut around the Jeddah Corniche circuit for the prancing horse with minimal preparation is a daunting prospect, but he did handle it well enough, finishing 7th overall and left a good impression ahead of what was almost certainly a guaranteed seat for Haas in 2025, although he probably didn't guess that he would already be in that seat just a few months later. Deputizing for the band K-Mag in Baku, he did alright, I guess. Kind of hard to shine in that scenario, although Interlagos was a glimpse into what we're bound to see next year. He just looked at home in that car until the main race had to turn up and ruin everything. It may have only been 3 races, but he more than proved his potential. But did Jack Doohan do the same? Getting your debut call-up for the final race of the season was bound to be a mixed bag. Everyone else had already been racing for the entire year, but this is a track that everyone knows inside and out. You've driven here in Formula 1 cars before, so surely the task isn't all that daunting? Yeah? He qualified last for the Grand Prix and would finish the race in 15th, while his teammate was a constant pest in the top 10 and haggling for double-digit points at times. I admit it doesn't sound like $1 million, but for a dude who, a couple of years ago, I erroneously described as being dumber than a box of rocks, he kept his nose clean and did what he needed to do, not pulling anything as stupid as, say, ramming into Hulk's Haas. It's kind of impossible to properly grade his performance based on this one race. The fact of the matter is, though, that the sample pool is just not big enough to make a proper adjudication. So, as a compromise, for this year, I give him a rating of yes. Although, if he's going to go up against Pierre Gasly next year, he's gonna have to be a hell of a lot better than that. At the start of the season, Alpine were a complete joke, and that's not really a matter of opinion. They had the slowest, or nearly the slowest, car on the grid, and prospects for this team weren't all that glowing. They needed to be brought back to a time where the team was run by a well-fed Italian, minus the cheating. Funnily enough, he would return, and the performance of the car picked up. And when that happened, the drivers were better able to show what they were made of, and Gasly started to grace the points on a semi-regular basis. The last few rounds that year, in fact, were nothing short of remarkable. Blinding speed in Vegas and Abu Dhabi helped propel him to 10th in the standings, and his podium at Interlagos certainly helped. But on the subject of that podium, lest we forget who finished 2nd to his 3rd. Esteban Ocon is the quintessential French racing driver. He could be catastrophically fast whenever he's not being catastrophically French. His gymnastics with Gasly in Monaco almost led him to be suspended for the Canadian Grand Prix, and not long after the fact, his exit from the team altogether was confirmed for the end of the year. It was a tricky first half of the season, but as we've seen on more than enough occasions this year, in particular Interlagos, where he claimed a valiant 2nd place, he can still be a commodity. Finishing way down on Gasly in the standings does put a damper on things, and it feeds this narrative that he's not all that he's cracked up to be, but he'll be headed to Haas with a point to prove. Of course, who doesn't have a point to prove in the sport? It's Formula 1 for crying out loud. Everyone here is trying to convince everyone of their potential and their worth. Some, however, have more on the line than others. It's kind of hard to believe that this season was Yuki Tsunoda's 4th in Formula 1. Could have sworn he debuted last year. The fact that Yuki had scored 2/3 of VCARB's total points tally this year speaks volumes as to how he has performed. Yes, he did seem to struggle to cope whenever the pressure was ramped up. Like, it seemed to be a distraction for him whenever his teammates got the better of him. But for the vast majority of the year, it was never a problem because they never did get the better of him. People, I expected him to melt against his more experienced teammate, but that didn't happen either. He's absolutely deserving of a run at that 2nd Red Bull seat. Whether I think he would succeed or not doesn't matter, because he's done just about everything that he needs to do to warrant the shot. Having said that, do we really want Yuki to go up against that guy at Red Bull? Because for the last few years, it has been a poison chalice. It could be only half a year before he winds up being the next casualty of the 2nd seat of doom. But of course, while this bedtime story is all very well and good, why would Liam Lawson be any different? Nabbing points in his first race of the year is exactly the statement that Liam Lawson needed to make. Yuki had a slight edge in terms of qualifying pace, but he was right there with him. These were all the right moves that he needed to make, and then he completely shat the bed in Vegas, while Yuki ran away and made him look like a joke. Liam got out-qualified in all 6 races he had this year, and while the margins weren't big at all and the whole experience thing and blah 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 blah, winning is winning, and sprint qualifying don't really count. He got desperately unlucky with the Witch's Curse in the final round at Abu Dhabi, but when you boil it all down, Yuki had out-qualified him and he outscored him. On those merits, Yuki deserves that shot at the Red Bull seat over Liam. Yuki over here screaming, "I gave you everything I have," while Christian Horner goes, that's cool, Anyway, what's over here? Of course, this whole thing is way harder to adjudicate than most of the community make it out to be. Liam's performances this year were alright, but if he does end up being shipped up to Milton Keynes, he's gonna have to dial it up by a lot. In the meantime, let's talk about another victim of Red Bull's blatant knee-jerk reactions. This year was meant to be a return to form for Daniel Ricciardo, the precursor toward him getting back into the main Red Bull camp after having been through hell and back. Instead, he stayed in hell, and the beginning of this year was about as painful to watch as his McLaren years. Immediately, questions arose, for he was brought in for one purpose, and that was to beat Yuki. That was what his contract was basically demanding, but he wasn't really doing it. He did gradually rein in the pace in his last few races, but if we take away the freak result from the Miami sprint, what we were left with was a disappointing run of races and an early exit. Irrespective of whether you think Liam was a worthy replacement, Daniel didn't really deserve to get dropped mid-season like he did, even if he wasn't the same dog that he was in circa 2014 to 2018. But when it comes to drivers who do deserve to be dropped, there is someone very high up that list who never will be. Okay, I have tried to be nice. I've tried to accentuate his talents as a driver and implore people to see his potential. A lot of the time, the gaps to his teammate aren't really that big and are pretty respectable, but there are also many moments where the gaps can be bad, where the mistakes can be pretty rookie-esque. But Lance Stroll hasn't been a rookie since 2017. He's been in Formula 1 for longer than most people on the grid, and yet he still meanders around the track with the grace of a drunk on a slip and slide. It seems that every 2 weeks, we hear the same tired rhetoric spewed from Mike Crack about how, he's not that bad. Maybe he isn't that bad, but he is not this future world champion that Big Daddy wants him to be. The level of hypocrisy being thrown around, saying he's not in there because of family connections, is asinine. You can't seriously expect us to believe that, right? But what next? The moon is made of cheese? Those drones over New Jersey are actually just airplanes? This is Formula 1. This is the pinnacle of motorsport. You can't pull the same bullshit you did in Formula 4 and Formula 3 with all the crap that was alleged to happen there. And another thing, we keep on talking about this guy as being a rainmaster, but ever since Turkey where he got pole position, when was the last time he was any good in the rain? Hell, do you remember the last time he tried starting in the wet? What are we doing here anymore? I don't want to sound cruel here, but how many chances do we have to give this guy? I've never seen a driver this pampered within a team over literally any mistakes. No one truly believes the PR jargon coming out of that camp right now, so why bother continuing the charade? But keeping the likes of Drugovich and Colapinto on the sidelines of Formula 1 in lieu of this Donny is beyond embarrassing. And with Adrian Newey having fallen for the promise of the emptiness machine, Lawrence is going to have to ask himself a question here. What does he want to become world champion? His son or his team? Because one of them certainly can become that, and the other is getting a C- for what has been an otherwise average year, and yet another entry in the long, sad history of nepotism. Take him to WEC and get him out of Formula 1. Seriously, this is enough. Anyways, let's talk about a proper driver. Ah yes, Fernando Alonso, the Saint of Spain, the Baron of bad choices, the Lord of the eyebrows. Last year we saw the man back behind the wheel of a good car, and the euphoria of seeing him back on the podium again lifted the spirits of everyone who endeavors to call themselves a racing fan. This year, however, things have been a bit of a downer. Gone are the podiums, and back instead are the calls of "this car is crap." His consistent points haul, however, did nab him the accolade of the best of the rest. The Aston Martin this year has never been that much good, going backwards with every update that they've ever put on it, which does make you question who the hell they're relying on for technical feedback. It did seem, however, that save for a handful of races, Fernando maximized the equipment that he had and got valuable points for the team and for himself. So while the results haven't been all that flattering, you can't blame Fernando a hell of a lot for that. If only that excuse applied to this guy. For years now, that second Red Bull seat has been the poison chalice of Formula 1. Nobody who ventures into that seat survives. The beginning of this year didn't pan out too badly, with a handful of podiums, but in the midst of it all, there were questions as to whether Sergio Perez was going to turn this franchise around. Once the pace of the RB20 dropped off, Checo's form fell off a cliff, went through the earth, and straight through to the deepest pits of hell that Dante hadn't even dreamed of. Round 6 in Miami was the last time that he achieved a top 5 finish, and even in Red Bull's darkest days this year, that kind kind of stat just seemed inconceivable. Getting knocked out in Q1 was a constant, and a lot of the time, he struggled to make any headway from the rear of the grid. There were small glimpses throughout the year of the old checker we knew, the one from the 2020 season where people around the world begged Red Bull to take him on. But as it turned out, he's just another Giancarlo Fisichella, great in crap cars and crap in great cars. I have no sympathy for his leaving, but I do wonder if anyone can truly stand up to that main cat at Red Bull. It seems that one of the only people that could hold a candle to him as a teammate was Carlos Sainz. At the start of the year, when it was announced that he had lost his seat at Ferrari for 2025, Sainz replied in the best way that he could, by way of going on a tear in the first few rounds that year, including an assertive win in Melbourne that made him the hottest free agent on the market. That form sort of lulled throughout the middle portion of the year, before picking up again toward the tail end. He didn't quite have the absolute speed of his teammate, but that's in no way a disparagement. It more speaks volumes about the lineup that Ferrari had, a lineup with so much talent and potential that there isn't much you can really do to improve upon it. Well, that is, unless you manage to secure the signature of a 7-time world champion. The news that Sir Lewis Hamilton would be moving to Ferrari for 2025 didn't seem real. Not because he wouldn't belong there or anything, but because he had been a part of the Mercedes family in some capacity since 1998. And now, after all they've achieved together, it's all come to an end. So, did he go out on a high? Well, yes and no. Throughout the year, we saw a lot of the Lewis that we know, that unstoppable force of nature, only ever able to be foiled by illiterate officials or magic buttons. His win at Silverstone was pure emotion and will forever be one of the more memorable wins in F1 history. But there were a lot of other times this year where he was kind of nowhere, and I ain't convinced of the theory that he checked out whenever his car wasn't good enough. It's not typically in the nature of a racing driver to just flat out give up and poodle around, and if he needs things to be perfect in order for him to perform, he's going to the wrong ass team to get that. As asinine as comments from Eddie Jordan and Lucas de Grassi may seem, at some point in every athlete's life, no matter how great they may be, good things go. And as high a pedestal as I and many others put Sir Lewis up in the pantheon of F1 drivers, we have got to wonder just a little bit, because while he may have gotten the last laugh in Abu Dhabi with regards to the teammate battle and also having some great moments throughout the season, George Russell was the better driver throughout 2024. Keeping up with Lewis Hamilton is a feat in and of itself. To beat him in the standings on paper 2 out of 3 times is an absolute exclamation point. Maybe it doesn't tell the full story, but what it does show is that Russell was certainly a worthy adversary, at least compared to what Valtteri was, and you could see his development as a driver throughout the season. He was mostly solid as all hell, but it was toward the end of the year where he really hit a stride, in and outside of the steward's room, where he had become so two-faced, caught in the middle of a championship battle that he was never in. What he perhaps did lack is the X factor that his teammate possessed, as well as the racecraft, even if those things weren't always on full display. Still, the indignity of being passed around the outside on the final lap in Abu Dhabi was probably more dignifying than celebrating a fake podium for the upcoming F1 movie at the end of the race. But at least he shared that pain with that washed up has-been car merchant, Sonny Hayes. And Charles Leclerc, of course. There are a few things that I will never buy in my life. Mobile games, TeamU products, and the narrative that Carlos Sainz is a better driver than Charles Leclerc. More podiums, more wins, more pole positions, finishing higher in the standings as well, almost nabbing second as a matter of fact. It don't sound like a dude who is the lesser of the two Scuderia spectaculars. His racecraft this year was nothing short of freaking incredible, pulling some of the most impossible shit that even Ethan Hunt couldn't pull off. His feel-good win on his home streets of Monaco felt like a weight lifted off his shoulders, and climbing from the back row of the grid to finish on the podium in the final race of the season encapsulated just how damn good he is. It was a momentous weekend overall for him, especially competing alongside his two brothers during that first practice session, Arthur Leclerc and Oscar Piastri. Leclerc. If there is one word that could be used to describe Oscar Piastri's season for 2024, it would be disappointment. It wasn't necessarily bad, it just felt underwhelming. By and large, his results paled in comparison to the other side of that McLaren garage. The teammate battle was slanted against him, and it took him much longer to nab his first podium and race win. It didn't even feel as if it was a lack of confidence, as he typically showed composure and maturity far beyond his years. He also showed throughout the year that the pace was there too, but just never on a consistent basis. Even his maiden win in Hungary was a bit of a damn squib. Perhaps it was due to factors outside of his control, and when he was on it this year, he was the faster of the two drivers, but I guess we all just expected a little bit more from him this year, and instead, the praise and accolades went to his teammate, who also incurred a hell of a lot of vitriol for essentially throwing it all away. 2024 will perhaps be the year of what could have been for Lando Norris. Because it doesn't matter what events you want to pick or omit, Lando's mistakes did cost him at least a shot at the title. He typically wasted his front row starts and seemed to allow complacency to seep in, and I realize how easy it is for me to say from behind a desk, but one cannot deny the amount of self-inflicted damage that he had done upon himself. And what sucked was that it took away from what was otherwise a breakout year for him. When the MCL 38 came good a few rounds in, Lando was clearly asserting himself as the better driver at McLaren. He had devilish speed, he was so goddamn good, and his debut win in Miami seemed to lift the weight off of his shoulders. If he had had more weekends like he did in Abu Dhabi where he ran virtually faultless, he most likely would have become the world champion for 2024. Instead, he learned a valuable lesson, and that is you're gonna have to be better than perfect if you want to win a title fight against Max Verstappen. Another year, another championship. Truthfully, it shouldn't really have happened, as for a lot of the year, the RB20 wasn't really worthy of a race win, never mind a championship one. They say that Max won the championship in the first few races this year. Oh yeah? Well, what happened to the other 19 then? Those first few races were not at all what secured him the title. It was what he did afterwards, placing his Red Bull in positions where it really shouldn't have been, and just driving the results in and picking up wins wherever possible. His drives in races such as Interlagos exemplified that yes, he is all that, and then some. And more. He hasn't been without his problems, though. Instances where he went beyond the acceptable realms of aggression were kind of rancid, akin to what Ayrton Senna did back in his heyday, and that does leave his record stained somewhat, but not so much that it'll take away the A grade that he so richly deserves. Do you hate these ratings? Don't worry, I got you covered.
What the fuck is this piece of shit?
It seems we glaze the champion every year, doesn't it? Then again, they are the champion for a reason. But even though we proclaim Formula 1 to be the pinnacle of motorsport, who really was the best in the world this year? Well, to start off, there was Freddie Slater in the ranks of Formula 4, taking 2 championship titles in dominant fashion. Unless he doesn't want to be in one, I don't really know why the hell this guy isn't in an academy by now. Similar domination occurred in Moto3, when David Alonso surged to a title so complete that he was pretty damn close to double the points tally over the dude in second place. You can't ignore Shosu Boy in Japan for completing the Super Formula Super GT Championship double, and in the United States and America, you had Connor Zilic winning pretty much everything that he ever did, from stock cars to LMP2, from ovals to road courses. He absolutely killed it against seasoned professionals and highly acclaimed drivers. He is one of America's best prospects for racing, but when it comes to the Driver of the Year for 2024 award, it's pretty hard to look past Max. I know, it's a boring choice, and oh my god, the glazing's so bright! And wait, hey, you hear that? Yeah, I hear you. Ahead of time and through a computer screen. Plenty of people, especially from Brazil, asking, where is Gabriel Bortoleto in this list? Look, I hear you. The second coming of Enrique Bernaldi had a great year. Back-to-back F3 and F2 titles in debut years is remarkable. The problem isn't him, it's the series that he's raced in. Formula 2 is a fucking mess. Nobody knows where anyone truly is. There's conjecture about the engine performance throughout the grid despite it being a spec series costing 3 million euros a season, and the cars themselves are kind of pathetic overall. Have a look at what Japan does with Super Formula. Now those are cars that should be the final step before Formula 1, rather than these frickin' boats. So until that spud-headed swine Bruno Michel wants to finally sort out the issues plaguing the championship with regards to parity, design flaws, and especially reliability, then I will be glad to give that championship some attention. And perhaps all this warrants Bruno getting a look in for the coveted Manus of the Year award, an award given to the biggest pest in the world of motor racing, who has done the most damage to the sport and its community. But really, this year, it was kind of a no contest. It could have only gone to none other than the president of the FIA, the inventor of the micropenis himself, Mohammed bin Sulayem. His attempts to expand the Formula 1 grid are commendable, and I will give him his flowers over that. But the seedy corruption and tone deafness prevalent throughout his tenure means this is a one-horse race where no superlatives can do it justice. This is what you asked for. Heavy as the crown blood. If this dude has taught us one thing this year, it's to not be a Manus.